Welcome. This is the Online Ethics Center's Spring 2023 webinar series, Bringing Ethics into the Conversation. I am Caitlin Wiley. I'm an associate professor of science, technology, and society at the University of Virginia, where I teach engineering ethics and data ethics. So in case you don't know already, the Online Ethics Center is a digital repository for resources on teaching and learning about ethics in engineering and science. The OEC also fosters a community of faculty, students, researchers, and other professionals who come together to discuss ethics. So please check out our website at onlineethics.org. The theme of our spring webinar series is engineering justice, and I'm delighted to host our speakers today. We're going to start with Mira Olson. Dr. Olson is an associate professor in the departments of civil, architectural, and environmental engineering, and engineering leadership and society at Drexel University. She holds a BS in mechanical engineering and a BA in environmental sciences and engineering from Rice, and an ME and PhD in civil and environmental engineering from the University of Virginia. The broad focus of her research is on protecting source water quality with current interests in transboundary water management and community-based research design. Dr. Olson directs Drexel's newly established peace engineering program. So after Dr. Olson's talk, she's going to discuss this important work with Kyle Eggers, who is a peace engineering fellow at the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University. And then we'll finish with questions from you. So to ask a question, please type in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and I'll read it to Mira and Kyle. So Mira, thanks for being here. Over to you.
Thanks for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, great. Thanks for that intro. I'm happy to be here with all of you, and particularly to be in conversation here with Kyle, who you'll hear from shortly. I am already a big fan of Kyle's work, and also the Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason. So I thought what I'd do is just start with a bit of an overview of how we built our program in peace engineering here at Drexel, and how we even came to merge the seemingly disparate fields of peace building and engineering. And I should add fields, because they are both academic disciplines with theories and best practices, and they're both fields of practice as well. And then I'll move on a little bit to describe how, and it is a work in progress, how we're working to infuse ethics and justice and conflict sensitivity into engineering education and practice and outreach and everything that we do at universities. But do feel free to send in questions and to steer me in different directions towards the end of the hour, as there are other things that you may want to hear. Okay, so I think probably that most of us on this call, or many of us on this call, can imagine a world in which all engineers are working in support of environmental protection, social justice, human rights, and peace. As it is, our largest employers are in defense and energy. So how do we get there? And what are the different modes of engagement, of research, education? How do we have to do things differently in the long-standing practice of engineering to try to elevate some of those values in our educational programs, in practice, in the workplace? How do we do that? So I just want to start sort of thinking about that. Two of the things that we focus on the program that we built here are building partnerships, working together across disciplines, and then also partnerships within communities and organizations who are going to be users of anything that we're working on. And we really apply that to all elements. To, at a university, we work on education and research and outreach, and we build that partnership model into everything. And the second thing we try to focus on is expanding the role or the responsibility of the engineer themselves. So moving beyond the point of just designing and implement something, but circling back and thinking about how is it working and who is it not working for, and how do we fix that disparity, and expanding that's not traditional engineering work. So how do we incorporate that into our understanding of what we are to do as engineers? So I'll just describe a little bit how we started this program at Drexel. We built peace engineering at Drexel in direct collaboration with the Peace Tech Lab, which is a spinoff of the U.S. Institute of Peace in Washington, D.C. And they formed really with the acknowledgement that they needed to be better adept at using technology and social media and data in the work that we were doing to accelerate local peace building and conflict resolution efforts. So that was their domain and what they worked in. And they really understood that technology was being used all over the world in ways that they were not keeping up with. And it was their effort to try to incorporate more of that. The problem being that there weren't many people who were cross-trained and sort of understood both the technology design and implementation and the very complex realities of conflict situations and peace building efforts. So at the time, and still now, the director of the Peace Tech Lab is Sheldon Himmelfarb. And through, I think it was through Bernard Amerde, who's also an engineering professor, and also founder of Engineers Without Borders, who was on the board of Peace Tech Lab, and Joe Hughes, who was at the time Dean of Engineering at Drexel University, they decided to address the other problem in engineering, and that we were not always doing a great job addressing some of the greater grand challenges and the social problems of our day. And part of that was because we didn't understand the complexities on the ground. So some of the peace building and conflict studies that come into play when you're working on the ground. So it was sort of in an effort to improve both disciplines that they came together, and we started building what would be this combination of peace building and engineering and social sciences to the benefit of, I'd say, all disciplines. So the idea was that we could improve both peace building efforts by integrating technology, and we could improve engineering outcomes by infusing a conflict sensitivity. So, I think most students go into engineering wanting to make the world a better place, wanting to change the world. And you can't argue that there've been a lot of advancements due to engineering, but I think you also have to acknowledge the damage that's been done by many engineering practices. So how do we better align the work that we do with the outcomes that we want to see? And it really takes, we weren't getting there with traditional engineering disciplines in education and practice. So what can we learn from peace building to bring into engineering to better realize what we want to see as outcomes in the work that we do?
Sorry to pause you real quick, but I don't think your slides are advancing on the PDF, so just wanted to raise that.
How about now?
Yep, now we're seeing the correct slides.
Okay, sorry about that. So all you
Yep, no
missed,
problem.
yeah, you missed that, you missed this, and you missed that. Okay, thank you, Kyle. Yeah, definitely please stop me. Okay, so I think one of the challenges in working in an area that you're building as you go along and trying to define is actually defining what you mean that you're working on. So we definitely struggle to define what peace engineering is. I mean, I guess now we could probably ask ChatGPT to give us a definition of engineering and it would spit out a whole thesis on it. But we like to, coming from the engineering disciplines, we like to think of it as the application of systems level science and engineering in support of conditions for peace. And I really like Rob Rosigliano's definition of peace, not as a static state, but more as a state of human existence that's characterized by sustainable levels of human development and healthy processes for change. So an ability to not be without conflict, but to be able to overcome it in order to advance society, technology, and change in the world. So this was built, there was a study that was done of, I think it was dozens of humanitarian workers. And I think in this particular study, they were all working within the realm of water and sanitation. So it was bringing clean water to communities who didn't have it. And almost unanimously, the people who were working to design the interventions and also the communities that were then receiving and maintaining and sustaining those interventions mentioned not only appreciation of the actual change that they saw, which was like, delivery of clean water, but it was also the value of the change in their overall quality of life. So it's sort of this idea that, yes, you're going to have technology producing and engineering producing something that's going to be used, but going beyond that, it should help establish a better way of life. And this, Rob Rosigliano refers to this as kind of a peace writ large. So this overall state of improving the human existence. And so that's what we think that peace engineering is working towards. Okay, so then how do we pivot what we're doing to get to this model where we're able to better realize some of the outcomes that we want to see? And if we think historically about engineering, and I'm talking like Stone Age historically, a long time ago, engineers designed things that they themselves were going to use, or maybe their family, or maybe a small tribe or a small community. But it was very place-based, it was very local, and it was very much in tune with the actual needs of the person or people who are going to be using something. And we have come a long, long way from that. Now we can be designing things that billions of people will use. We can even more, we can be designing like little pieces of little parts that go into things that billions of people use. So we've kind of lost this integration of the design and the user. And so how do we fill in that gap? How do we understand some of those complexity, what it's being used for, what the value of it is? How do we do that? How do we build those partnerships that help us integrate some of that information into what we're doing? And it's hard work. So I say the value of partnerships in everything we do is something that we very much stress. And it's hard work to figure out not only who to get together, but then how to work together, and then how to value what everyone brings. I think those of us in academia definitely understand the benefits of multidisciplinary work, where you have people with different disciplines coming together to work together, to bring different things to a complex problem. But if we're honest with ourselves, I think a lot of people have bias to the work that they do and that they do themselves, and to the way they do it. So you have to try to get past that in building the partnerships to get to more of an integration, and then hopefully eventually to this shared vision and shared values that may not completely align with all the individual partners coming together, but in hopefully are going to be transdisciplinary and more representative of the collective values of the group. So that's kind of the goal. And it's hard even within university settings. It's even harder when you're doing that with diverse partners and communities. So this diagram that's here on the right that has trust in the middle. This is from a collaborator. His name is Chris Barr. He works in the East Parkside neighborhood in Philadelphia. I think this particular project was looking at solar installations within the neighborhood. But I always start everything that I do with community partners by setting up first some rules for engagement. How do we even want to work together? And this usually involves taking like 10 steps backwards from where I even think I should be starting. Like even how should we meet and how should we communicate? It's probably not 10 a.m. in a conference room on my university campus. That's probably not going to work for many of the people that I'm working with. So how do you even come up with the expectations, the boundaries, what we want to get out of each other, some of the realities? There's some things that we can do and some things that we can't do. So how do we make that clear? How do we establish rules of engagement? So that's very important to me in practice and in building with partners. And I think it helps to establish a trust in working together. And I will say this is an imperfect process, and often you say the things that are important to you, and you have to go back and make sure that you're continually adapting to what to do when they don't work, when they're not possible, and when you're struggling with some of them. So I won't spend a lot of time on this, but I just will say it's group work and it's individual work to try to come to these shared values and identities. The other thing we like to think about is how do we get engineers to ask different and better questions and actually make them a legitimate part of the design process. So this smaller image here on the left, that's kind of a classic life cycle assessment framework. And if you think about life cycle assessment, it did not take very long, probably not more than about a decade, to infuse that into product design pretty systematically. So to look at the environmental impacts, the greenhouse gas emissions, the embodied energy, and product development from cradle to grave. So to give us the tools that we needed to assess that and the guidelines for implementing that happened fairly quickly. So can we take that model, which was focused on environmental impacts, and apply it to social impacts? Can we start asking the questions that go into engineering design and product design and use that start helping us answer the social impacts and the social disparities and the justice of the work that we're doing. So for example, this is by no means a comprehensive list, but in terms of the design, who has inputs into this and who's using it, and how could it possibly be misused if that were to happen? Who has access? What happens to the people who don't have access? Does that create a disparity? Does that further deepen a divide? Using something long-term, how does that play out over the long term? Who benefits? Who incurs the risk? Who's responsible? So can we infuse some of those questions in much the same way that we did in looking at environmental impacts, but for some of these social impacts, and give people both the tools and the guidance to fully incorporate this actually into the design phase. So I'll just briefly go through some examples. I don't want to talk too long. I want to get to questions, but just to show you how this is playing out both in our educational program and in some of our research topics. So this is what our master's degree program looks like. And you can see in blue that we have a focus on data analysis, and that's both quantitative and qualitative, and some of the merging of qualitative and quantitative data, which is messy and confusing and kind of my favorite part. Definitely a focus on systems analysis and risk that we have in the middle. And then some basic skills in peace building and conflict assessment, which is new material for engineers. This is not something that they've come in contact. This is not something that's part of our general curriculum. And we built this with the Peace Tech Lab. This is not something that engineers typically have expertise in. Rounding that out with social sciences and technical electives and experiential learning. I just want to give you a couple of examples of how we translate into research, not to go into detail in any of these, but just to give sort of a sampling with the emphasis that every single one of these is community partnered. And also many of them have us working in realms that are not traditional engineering disciplines. So for example, one of my colleagues is on the Pennsylvania Public Health Task Force for Gun Violence. It's the only engineer in the room. It's not something that engineers are typically brought in, but there are some effective technology and data tools that are helpful in approaching that problem. And having engineers and scientists involved at the beginning discussions as opposed to the end discussions where you're just asked to deliver something is extremely helpful in building an understanding of what goes into everything, making things more adaptable and responsive to how people would actually use them. So I'm happy to answer questions on any of these as we go ahead, but I will say that for each and every one of them, it generally starts by bringing people together in a room who have probably never, ever been in a room before. So this is just one example of a workshop that was held. This one was looking at civilian harm post-conflict and during conflict, and try to expanding our understanding of what harm really is. So we had academics, practitioners, people on the ground, people with experience in analytics and engineers to describe tools, sort of thinking about ways forward. And what resulted from this was a collaboration with humanitarian organizations and academics looking at some of the impacts of conflict on civilians and the environment, knowing that most of the time, impacts are quantified in terms of casualties, injuries, and damage to infrastructure, but that doesn't give a full understanding of civilian harm in any way. And so trying to get an understanding from people on the ground of what harm looks like and how we can quantify that and build it again. We kind of took a life cycle assessment model for building this tool and understanding. So very brief overview. I do want to get to questions, but I just wanted to give you sort of an idea of what that looks like. And as we move on to hearing from Kyle, I want to describe that the concept of peace engineering or engineering with a peace building lens or a conflict sensitivity in it is, I mean, there's some people who have been doing this their whole careers, but in terms of trying to build a discipline around it, there are a number of universities and partners that we work with, one of which is the Peace Engineering Lab at George Mason. But, you know, I'd say we all have our different areas of focus. So I think at Drexel, we tend to focus more on the infrastructure. I think the Carter School is more in the cyber world. Some of our colleagues at University of New Mexico are really connected with national labs in the defense industry. Colleagues at Stanford are looking at innovation and entrepreneurship and building peace standards into that. So really a diverse group with different areas of focus that we kind of bring together. So with that, I will stop and I will let us hear from Kyle.
Awesome. Thank you, Mira. Wow, that's been really helpful for me to get this overview of what peace engineering means for you at Drexel and that it's part of a broader movement. Fantastic. So let's invite Kyle on. Kyle Eggers is a PhD candidate and Peace Engineering Fellow at the Jim and Rosalind Carter School for Peace and Conflict Resolution at George Mason. He holds an MA of International Peace Studies from the UN mandated University for Peace. At the Carter School's Peace Engineering Lab, he focuses on developing scalable intervention strategies to conflict powered by a narrative sense-making technology called SenseMaker. His dissertation research is titled Us Against When, the Futures of Complexity-Informed Conflict Transformation in the United States. And in this work, he adapts SenseMaker methodology to explore interpretations of future artifacts that are generated by prominent US-based peace-building organizations. And their goal is to make more meaningful, more scalable, more successful interventions in states that are at risk for political violence. So Kyle, we're delighted to have you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and it's always great to be in conversation with Mira and the other partners from the Peace Engineering Consortium. And since we started the Peace Engineering Lab at George Mason just 3 years ago, I know that it's been a pretty big learning curve for me as somebody without an engineering background, you know, being firmly within the peace and conflict resolution type of field, to be learning what the types of approaches are that engineers are using, what the kind of design processes are, the way that they're working with communities, and basically just what their interest is in peace and some of the skills that have been developed within my field. So it's always exciting to get on these calls and to hear the updates and continue my own learning as well. But my first question for you, Mira, is you mentioned at the end that, or you told a little bit about the Peace Engineering Consortium that both of our institutions are a part of. And what would you say are some of your biggest learnings from the other members of that consortium, and how do some of these different institutional specialties overlap and come together?
Yeah, thanks. And forgive me if I bounce some of these questions back to you, because what I love about working with Kyle is that we're both working in the peace engineering space, but I'm coming from engineering and he's coming from peace and conflict studies. But I'd say for that question, I love, what I most appreciate is the different methods that we all use. We kind of approach problems differently. We generate different data. We have different ways for analyzing and gaining meaning from it. And that's something that I've definitely learned from different members from different disciplines. And we've tried to come together around like standards, things that we can all agree upon and understand as ways to evaluate things. But I really enjoy the richness of learning how different methods, different research methods of gaining information. And of course, then the next step, which is how to integrate that, how to integrate different like information gathered from different knowledge bases and bringing that together into ways that we can make decisions valuing all of them. I think that's kind of the messy part. That's kind of where we are right now. But that's what I appreciate a lot. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've always appreciated are the attunement to different types of methods, but then also just the broad areas of interest that are represented. So you mentioned that Drexel is working on more infrastructure conflict and working on water. Then we also have some of the folks at like Stanford, for example, that are focused on peace finance or those types of aspects and how that integrates into the types of resources that need to be brought to bear to make some of these peace engineering initiatives happen, or the focus on emerging technologies, somebody like the Peace Innovation Institute. So during the weekly calls that we have, I always feel like there's new topics that are coming up, and it's exciting to to always see how those different projects are emerging and the different types of the realms that they're in. The next question is really on this issue of community partnership and community engagement. And what would you say are some of the ways that trust can be built with community partners that might have goals that are either at odds with some of what the university goals would be, or partners that have been disappointed at best or exploited in the past, sometimes by universities?
Yeah, that's definitely something that we run into working locally. I mean, Drexel's in the middle of West Philly with so many different research universities in like a very small area that have very much over researched and surveyed our community partners. So there's definitely this level of resentment there. I think what I've found is that you commit to the partner more so than the project. And this is hard for researchers to understand. And it's hard to describe, and it's hard to put within confines of like how you do research at the university. But I found that's kind of what you have to do. I'll give you an example. I'm working with a number of tribal communities in coastal Louisiana, and an organization that advocates and represents their best interests. And we've been working together for probably 4 years. And when we started, it was pre-COVID, we were kind of looking at, they were trying to reshift some of their workforce to better adapt to green energy that was slowly moving into the area from a very heavy oil and gas region. I mean, it's the Gulf Coast, it's heavily refineries. So they were trying to rethink like what skills they had that were transferable to potentially new opportunities in the green economy. And we started working on that. And then COVID hit, and then they had 3 of the most devastating hurricanes that they've had, and priorities just shifted. I can assure you we are no longer talking about those things. It was issues of housing, it was coastline restoration, it was water management, it was so many different things, and you just kind of have to roll with it and have built the understanding that you're committed to the partner rather than the project. And so I think, yeah, that's one of the main things that I've been learning.
Yeah, that I think that absolutely resonates with my experience, both in some of the recent projects that we've done at the Peace Engineering Lab, but also, which I don't know that I've told you much about this, but I was actually working with the Kickapoo tribe in Kansas during my early days as a grant program evaluator with the University of Kansas. And so I've, definitely seen the importance and try to integrate into my practice that type of commitment to just putting the people first and then the project second, making sure that you're always tending to what the emerging needs are. And I feel like the role at the university a lot of times is trying to help the projects be adaptive and kind of be that mediating body between the rules and regulations that we have as researchers or as people implementing a grant program, and then the needs that are on the ground. And so I think that part definitely really resonates with me. And on this note too about trying to continue to put the community partners forward and develop some different structures and kind of push the engineering field to be more conflict sensitive. As the peace engineering as a whole is a relatively new field that's trying to get a better foothold and get more legitimacy and secure resources that are necessary to do all of these things. What are some of the structural barriers that you faced while trying to develop the field? And are there any places where, I guess, the resistance to either specific project ideas or the field as a whole have come from?
There are so many, I don't even know where to start. Okay, I'll start within my own discipline. So within my own discipline, a lot of the work that I do seems to be outside of the scope of what traditional engineers think is real work, or not real work, but work that an engineer would be doing. But I mean, if you commit to only designing and implementing the thing, that's not what I want to do. You want to commit to making sure it then works for everyone, and then figure out why it doesn't work for some people and how to make it better work for the ones that it doesn't. And, I get, why are you going to another community meeting? Why are you doing so much social work? But I mean, if you are committed to making sure that what you put out in the world is actually improving the lives of the people who are using, like what you intended it to do in the very first place, you have to take on the responsibility of doing work that's outside of the design itself. So I'd say that that's pushback I get within my own field and discipline. I think there is a lot of, like, I struggle because it is sometimes hard to articulate goals and milestones, partly what I talked about before, because it's always changing, but it just doesn't fit into the typical timelines of a research proposal. Like, it takes much longer than that to, build trust with a community partner and even figure out what it is that you want to work on. It exceeds the timelines for actually doing the work. And then by the end, you're probably working on something completely different anyway. So it's hard to put, like, to match priorities of funders and research agencies, and even like sort of research priorities at universities. So, working where I work, which is in a university, that certainly is a barrier. But practitioners say the same thing. Like, I think funding for some of the humanitarian organizations is siloed as well, and given with a particular purpose. So I think that's kind of a universal struggle. But I think those are sort of my two biggest.
Yeah, I think that reminds me that one of the aspects of the definition of peace building was dealing with complexity, and the complexity that's inherent in any time you're trying to intervene in a social system, and that's something that we've focused on a little bit more at the Carter School. But I think that in a lot of the peace engineering processes, you're definitely seeing how some of these funding timelines or institutional requirements are really put together in a linear way to define all of the outcomes of the input of your program, and then directly linking those to what exactly will happen if you stick to the timeline. And I think you made a really good point that to be effective and to actually get some of the systemic transformations that we want to have, we have to challenge some of those assumptions as well. And for the next question, are there and this is just a general one, are there any projects or tools that have been developed by peace engineers that are a really important part of your ecosystem? It might be a particular method or something like that you're really excited about.
Well, I would say your sense maker is one of them. So when I'm done talking, I'm going to let you describe that to everyone as well, because I just think it's an effective way for getting different types of data into a format that's very easily compared to other quantitative elements of data. But I'll say that any time that I'm working on something, I try to also think of what I have to add to a tool or design or something to make it more effective. So I've done work recently looking at transboundary water management, so water allocation among different users within a watershed. And so one of the basins I work a lot in is the Jordan River Basin between Israel and Jordan and Palestine. And so that's an area of the world that has had to rely on non-traditional sources of water. I think early droughts in the 2000s made it so that the natural resources, our typical sources of water, our surface water, groundwater, and rainwater, were not sufficient for the growing demands with the drought, the climate change and the drought that was being experienced there. So they quickly pivoted to desalination units and recycling, reusing wastewater for agriculture. And now that's a huge portion of their water budget now. And so in designing a water allocation model that looks at how to allocate those resources equitably among those different users, I also build with that a negotiation exercise. So how do you so whenever you have different users of a shared resource initially coming together, they show up with their own priorities because, a shared environmental resource like water doesn't fall nicely within the geopolitical boundaries of a country that's trying to provide it for all of its users. So building with that a negotiation exercise that tries to, again, this is what I've learned from peace builders, to try to get people past their individual priorities to the shared commitment to a shared resource. So how do we come up with our shared priorities? And I think if you do that first, you have a much more productive allocation exercise of like, okay, these are the resources of water that we now have. We can invest in more technology. We have to support it. There are, of course, individual priorities of each country and region, which is, drinking water, industry, agriculture, everything that they need. But there are also shared commitments to environmental resources, just keeping water levels in the environment that are threatened when everyone is overusing a basin. And so I think establishing that at the beginning, I'm sort of like presenting everything together. As I build the water allocation model, I'm building the negotiation tool as well. And I think that helps get people to a better place of allocating the resource. Would you
Very
like
cool.
to share with us SenseMaker a little bit?
Sure. So one of the approaches that I've been working with at the Carter School and at the Peace Engineering Lab is called SenseMaker. And I would say the main challenge that it's trying to address is that how to deal with these issues of scale and complexity within conflict environments. So with anything that's peace related, we face this problem that peace is an emergent property that will look different in every community and based on the people that are involved in the system that you're working in. And everybody's going to interpret that environment in a different way. And different aspects of it are going to be important to them and their kind of individual sense-making process of what's going on. That would contribute to peace or reducing or preventing violence. And so the way that SenseMaker works is you provide people with a prompt where they can share a short experience that matters to them. And then they interpret that experience on a series of these triangle questions, which is where you can start to bake in some of the relevant theory and practice that are the kind of constraints or conditions that might be at play and what you're looking at. And so then what you can produce with that is maps of the ways that people are interpreting the complex environment, because the way that they interpreted their stories provides quantitative data for the qualitative narrative data that they're sharing about their experience. And then a lot of what you do with that process, once you have the data, are using it for sense making and to design experiments or probes that you can use to test some of the different hypotheses that you can generate off of the patterns that you're seeing. So I think what some of what we've been looking at with that are community conflicts. So one of my colleagues, Ashton Romer, who's actually an urban planner and definitely more involved in the urban infrastructure side of things and transportation conflicts, was brought together a partnership with the Southwest Business Improvement District in DC. And so we are using it to better understand how the Southwest neighborhood was changing with some of the different neighborhood development that was happening recently. And then using that to feed back into some of the programming that the Business Improvement District was doing for community engagement. And then the main project that I'm doing that will be developing a lot more over the next year is the Us Against Wind project that I'm partnering with Common Ground USA and the Horizons project to get some interpretations from key states about well, this one's a little different because it's working with artifacts from the future, but it's trying to see what the perceptions are of the environment and what's possible to help inform peace building programs there. So, so that's a little bit about that. But I think the shared interest and a lot of what we've been trying to do at that lab is really focusing on that piece of connecting some of these peace technologies or these data collection methods to feeding back into the conflict resolution processes with as you were saying, Mira, with adding something like the negotiation simulation to the front end of a design process, so that you can really get a better outcome by tending to some of the sense making or the social side of these engineering projects. Just to bring it back around there, but turn it over to Caitlin here to open up the Q&A.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to connect that point to a bunch of the questions from the audience, which is like, how do you bring
A lot of good ones coming in.
Yeah, such good questions. And you guys are really talking about this question of how do we bring together the partners and the different kinds of expertise. And it sounds like the data aspect of it is a big part of it, that you're using different kinds of data and synthesizing them in ways that maybe none of the partners could do on their own. So I think that's a really interesting part of what you guys are doing and what peace engineering is trying to do. So on that note, from both of you, I'd love to hear the answer to this. What research do you think is most needed to move peace engineering forward?
I'll go first. Yeah, I guess maybe we could answer from like, I tend to be more of an infrastructure focus and you need to be more of a cyber focus, but you know, I think initially, I think you can think individually to place-based projects, but I'll try, and that's sort of a different answer, but I'll try to move sort of more globally. And then I think we're at the point where we can start identifying the additional information we want to know, like what should go into a design, what considerations should go into a design, figuring out ways to actually implement that, especially with infrastructure that lasts such a long time. So like both predicting or, you know, finding out ways for assessing what impacts are going to be, and then coming up with the ways to mitigate that. So, I mean, I guess if you just think of an example, you put in a bridge, it connects point A and point B. And so there are very, you know, noticeable changes at point A and point B. And just, you know, 10 miles away from point B, you might not have those advantages and disadvantages. And is that a disparity in some way that's going to grow over 100 years? So it's taking some of the information from the questions we know we need to be asking and figuring out ways to make that part of the process. And maybe it's like a continual iteration, and maybe it's a continual, you know, checking back in after something has been out there, but incorporating that into actually the doing of the process is, I think, really important. And with that, like, you know, metrics, how do we measure some of the things that we know are important? How do we agree upon ways of measuring that? Who gets to determine what we value and what we assess? So all those things I think are really important to sort of globally advance this type of work.
Yeah, I would agree with all of that, and I know that one thing that's always a consistent problem within the peace and conflict field is that issue of measurement, and it's a perennial problem that we have of when you're trying to relate any type of intervention into a peace impact or a conflict resolution impact. Everybody's always struggling at how to identify that. So I think that that's definitely a big area where some of the tools and things that we're developing within the peace engineering community could be useful, and also where there's a lot of crossover and expertise that exists within engineering communities that peace builders could really benefit and learn from. And the other thing that I would say, and this is maybe not a topic of research, but more of just a practice or an idea moving forward, but you know, peace and conflict resolution is also, it's kind of naturally existing in a transdisciplinary type of setting. So we're really used to you know, taking the good ideas and being eclectic, of what we're applying into practice from various different fields. But I think the thing that's really missing there so far in my experience is how to just have more projects that are partnered directly with engineers. So to have teams of peace engineers and kind of classic peace studies people, and having some diversity and carrying out the research together and learning together, because I think that that's where a lot of the interaction through the process of research will kind of create more coherence moving forward, is that eventually there's not a as much of a distinction of I'm a peace person or I'm an engineer person, but I'm a peace engineer. But I think that just where we're at now, that's a really helpful direction. Let's work
Yeah,
together more.
that's helpful to hear, and especially because both of you talked about the barriers to doing that, the barriers of being a university or being at a university and trying to work with community partners when we have different requirements and constraints rather. So yeah, I think this question of how do we make data, how do we make information legible to these different groups, and then how do we build it into infrastructures, and then that can include our own infrastructures, like how do we build partnerships as researchers? So thank you for bringing that all together. So one question is, how can we transform industry to favor this kind of systems approach to social issues? For example, how should we approach the Lockheed Martins or Exxons of the world to push them to focus their bottom line on sustainability? So how can we include industry in this network that you guys are talking about?
Yeah, I'll say our collaborators at University of New Mexico do a very good job with this. I mean, it's sort of with anything, you have to identify the common grounds. There must be some. And find allies from within. I mean, our graduates will go, some of them will actually work in fields or disciplines that are non-traditional to engineering, but bringing engineering skills. And some of them will get very traditional engineering jobs in their home disciplines. But think about how to change culture from within. So I think, I mean, you've named some very big industries, but I mean, I think that is a focus. I mean, you have to make it competitive. So, you know, the whole defense industry has built up by investing money to keep peace through weaponry. Is there another industry like the peace tech industry? What can we be investing in terms of technology that promotes peace that's going to have economic value as well? So yeah, there are people who think more about that than I do. But in approaching anything where you have disparate goals, you have to find the things that you can both commit to and start there, and then see how things grow. So you don't have to take on everything. You can find some things that can grow from there, and then, you know, see what's worthwhile to grow out of there.
Yeah, I think that's the most central point for sure. And I think one of the things that I've really appreciated about the peace engineering community is that they are dealing with some of the corporations or the private sector folks in a much more serious way, and kind of setting up forums to open up those conversation channels. And I think that just in general, building those types of relationships and having those channels open is you know, crucial, because any type of change takes a lot of time, and it'll be based on on the relationships that you have. Just like the one other piece that I would say from my end of things is that one of the most important things to sustain that engagement as well just seems to be you know, being rigorous and serious about the type of work that we're doing. And a lot of times it's changing the communication about what we're doing to meet some of the standards and language of audiences that we might not be familiar with. And so I think as we've been talking more about you know, some of the finance side, or what some of the different modes of calculation and thinking are about these issues, and what the criteria for decision making is, that's been one big adjustment for me too, is just learning what that language is, and then trying to frame the stuff that we're talking about in a way that's intelligible to these different communities without sacrificing the values and the work that we're bringing to the table.
Absolutely. And that
Something-
seems like such a crucial part of engineering ethics in general, right? How do you communicate what you care about to the people you're working with, whether they're unlikely partners like, industries, or just diverse partners that you're not used to working with. Yeah, so true. What an important skill set you guys are promoting. There are several questions about Mira's program in particular. So Mira, can you talk a little bit about who your students are in peace engineering, what their backgrounds are, and what kinds of jobs they get?
Sure. Yeah, I'm looking through those two and I see them. So since ours is a master's degree in engineering, students have to come with an engineering background. They have to be capable of taking at least 2 technical electives in engineering, at graduate level engineering courses. There is interest from students from different backgrounds. So I think we have a certificate that's only 3 of the courses that's open to anyone. And I think that's a little more attainable for some people. But just as we designed it, it's a graduate degree in engineering, so you have to have that engineering background. But they do come from all sorts of disciplines, and our classes fill with biomed, with chemical, mechanical, environmental. I think when we first started, we were heavily environmental because that's where I was pulling students from. But I think we've balanced out a little bit more now. So they come from all disciplines, but generally in engineering. In terms of where they're going after, so okay, admittedly, we haven't graduated very many students yet. But some do go into their traditional fields that they would have gone to anyway, but with just sort of this peace building lens that they bring to it. But there are definitely others that have gone in directions that they wouldn't have without the peace engineering background. I'll give a couple examples. So one is someone who came in with a water wastewater focus and always wanted to be a professional to work in that field. But she's working as one of 3 water wastewater, like from providing everything on a Native American reservation in Oklahoma. And she really feels like she wouldn't have had the capacity to be that place-based, that community worker and engineer had she not. She was working closely with communities in Louisiana before that. And she thinks that she would not have been able to do that without sort of her training. Another graduate is working, he's a sensor guy, like he was always interested in sensing technologies and sort of bridging the gap between like on the ground sensing and forestry, which is like sort of counting trees and getting area, to like satellite imagery sensing. So like what's in the middle. So he has also as a startup developing sensors, but he's now working for the Smithsonian. And they're placing satellites on different places. And he's raising a lot of questions on land tenure, like who owns this land? What happens if you put this telescope here? That I think he wouldn't have thought to, like it's an area of interest of his, but he wouldn't have thought to bring that into the design considerations had he not gone through this program. So I think it's been really helpful for him in trying to sort of set that up as they move forward. Like at the beginning, have that be at the beginning of the conversation and not just when there are conflicts about it after it's just been put in. So I think he's helping steer that. And I just spoke to him. His employers are actually very appreciative of that. Are there others?
Yeah, thanks. And I wonder, Kyle, if you want to reflect on that too, like why you chose a peace engineering program rather than a peace program or a peace studies program.
Yeah, so I guess so my PhD is actually still in conflict analysis and resolution, and the Peace Engineering Lab is part of a larger initiative that we have at the Carter School to set up these different peace labs to organize different areas of research and try and make it easier to, I guess, for us to really articulate what the key programs are, and what some of the areas of specialty that we have are at the school. And so the provost provided, due to some of the organizing efforts of some professors that we had, provided a couple peace engineering fellowships to then support students in the creation of this lab. And so I guess that the reason that I got involved in this in the first place was just being offered that fellowship and kind of being naturally aligned with developing this peace technology and some of the methods that are associated with that. And so the peace engineering space has just really given me the ability to explore within those areas and kind of play around and build some partnerships across these disciplinary boundaries. And for me, it's just been a way to organize a lot of that work and connect with a different community of people that's really, really interesting and that doesn't exist within the school right now. So just kind of a mode of reaching out and organizing the work.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I see a lot of parallels with sort of what is missing in engineering education more generally. And it sounds like your field is benefiting from engineering too. Like there are benefits to training students in how to negotiate, training engineering students in how to negotiate and how to express their values and how to talk to diverse participants. And then it's nice to hear the values that other fields get from engineering, like the data analysis, like the technology, like the systems thinking. It's really a nice blend.
I will say that one of the things that we're really excited about is that we were able to successfully get a peace engineering minor set up for undergraduate students, so that some of the courses at conflict at our school be cross-listed for engineering students and vice versa, so that in the undergraduate space they can take some engineering courses and get a sense for the type of thinking that's involved in that. So that's our big early win.
That is a big win because those students are going to learn a lot from each other. When you put the
Yeah.
engineers and the non-engineers in one class, that's going to be really fabulous.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, I think we'll stop there. Thank you so much to all of you, especially to Mira Olson and Kyle Eggers and the OAC's director, Dr. Rosalind Byrne, and our coordinator, Courtney Walker, and to all of you who wrote questions. Thanks for joining us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks so much, everybody, and really appreciate the opportunity to speak here.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in.